Good morning and welcome back to Hong Kong Rugby News. You join me in the surgery of Dr. David Owens, the Chief Medical Officer of the Hong Kong Rugby Union. David has been in place for over 20 years working at the Rugby Union and joins me today to discuss all the safety initiatives the Hong Kong Rugby Union are currently operating all around player welfare. Good morning, David.
David. Morning.
So David, player welfare is, in its broadest sense, is a hot topic at the moment. What is the Rugby Union's approach to player welfare?
That's a good question. I think I would take the view that player welfare is often thought of in too narrow terms. I think often we think of player welfare as just fixing broken bodies, people who get injuries around the pitch, and at the Rugby Union we try to think of player welfare in more broad preventative terms. So I'd look at it as anything that affects the well-being of a player, and that allows a different perspective. It's not just about injury, it's about injury prevention, it's about infection control, it's a broad review of player welfare.
I'm familiar, I'm sure you are, with the phrase of prevention is better than cure, and I know we touched on it briefly in your introduction. But to what extent does the Rugby Union adhere to that sentiment?
Very much so. I think I'm obviously fundamentally biased, but I would like to think we're a little bit ahead of the curve in that regard. I personally, and as a group, we've long had an interest in injury prevention. We recognise that rugby is a contact sport and injuries will occur, but there is some good evidence that those injuries can be reduced. They can be reduced by proper training and preconditioning, and that might be the remit of the coaches or the strength and conditioners. They can be reduced by changes in the laws, and in Hong Kong we in the medical department campaigned for the mandatory introduction of gum shields years ahead of many countries. They've been mandatory in Hong Kong for 10 years now. We also campaigned for the change of the scrummaging laws for juniors, and again in Hong Kong those regulations were changed before the IRB changed the recent depowering the hit. So we've focused on depowering the scrum, on changing the risks for juniors. And it's not only injuries, we see infections, we see a fair amount of infections in our population group, in part related to the climate that we have here. And again, we've introduced educational policies, we give support to the clubs, and we have a union-wide infection prevention program. We look at it.
Regarding player welfare, and specifically perhaps the issue of concussion, this is recent months and even the last couple of years, it's been a key concern amongst players, coaches and perhaps parents as well. What measures are in place at the Rugby Union to cope and deal with concussion?
I think that's right. Concussion is a big concern in world rugby. We take the view with all of our player welfare initiatives that we think in terms of two strands of education, and we think in terms of training. And education is key. Education of parents, for the young players, for coaches, and for medical personnel. We need to make people aware of what concussion is, how it can be recognised, that players must be removed to a place of safety, must be allowed to recover completely, allowing rest. We've taken a number of initiatives in this regard. We have a number of educational policies for the groups I described. We've also formed a concussion working group with key stakeholders, referees, coaches, medical personnel, and we've particularly engaged with the referees. Have been a huge support. They agreed to an initiative that we suggested in which the referee has the ability to provide a card to remove any player who's thought to have a concussion from the field. So in Hong Kong, if a referee or a coach or a member of the medical staff is concerned that a player on the field may be concussed, that player is assumed to have a concussion and they're removed from the field and they're not allowed to return to play under any circumstances.
And you talk about the training programs that are in place. What strikes me being in Hong Kong and perhaps the challenge is the broad spectrum of the rugby community here, where you have your mums and dads on a Sunday helping out their little kids at mini and junior programs, all the way through to Hong Kong hosting major worldwide events and playing, in fact, in elite competitions. So how does your department, and I suppose specifically your training programs, deal with such a broad spectrum?
Again, the focus is on the two strands of education and training. We view this almost as a pyramid. We have a top-down approach and we have a bottom-up approach. Philosophically, as a practitioner and as a player, as you know, I've always been bottom-up. I focus on education to as many people as possible, and we provide those educational resources, transferring knowledge and information that's already widely available from resources outside of Hong Kong. The IRB has excellent resources on concussion, for example. And we provide those in the form of talks and lectures and handouts and web interface. We also provide training, and at the bottom-up level we provide a first aid in sport training program where anybody can sign up and come along, and typically it's a one-day program which focuses on aspects of first aid training which would be specific to rugby. At the elite end of the game we run the level 3 IRB pitchside programs, and I was actually a member of the working group that developed these pitchside trauma programs. We have level 3, level 2, level 1, which the level 3 is really aimed at doctors and physiotherapists who would have a specific experience in rugby and management of emergencies in the rugby environment at any stage of the game. But that means that in Hong Kong we have the capacity to host, as you know, everything from the Rugby Sevens and the Bledisloe Cup and the British and Irish Lions. And these teams come to Hong Kong and they don't bring their own emergency medical teams with them because they're comfortable with the provisions and resources and expertise that we have available and have trained.
Well, it's been wonderful to hear all the policies and programs in place at the Rugby Union, but David, when it boils down to it, parents are still going to be concerned about their children being involved in the game. What's your take on those concerns?
Well, I think firstly I can understand those concerns, and I think we have to be respectful of that view. I would say that injuries will occur in rugby. We need to put in prevention programs. We need to make the game as safe as we can do for all of the players who play the game. But we also must look at the positive attributes of rugby. Player welfare is a positive concept to me, not just a reactive negative concept. I think players who play the game of rugby will develop skills, whether it's in leadership, cognitive abilities, the opportunity to travel, social interaction. I think we need to be better at quantifying the positive attributes of rugby, and also better, in truth, at quantifying the injuries and putting in place more evidence-based programs to prevent those injuries. Only then can parents really make an informed decision. I have 4 lads who played rugby, and I think they got many positives out of the game of rugby, but I do respect the fact that it's not for everybody, and we should encourage children to play sports and be active. And if it's not rugby, fantastic. It doesn't matter what it is so long as they're active. For us, rugby's our game, and we're trying to make it as safe as we possibly can for the children who play it.
Thank you, David. And again, it's been great to hear of all the innovative initiatives that Hong Kong Rugby Union, under David's watchful eye, are putting in place to ensure that all players involved with the game in Hong Kong are safe, and the game itself in this region goes from strength to strength.